Hi, my name is Joseph Bowden, and I first enlisted into the Australian Army Reserves in 1990, as a signalman with the 2nd Signal Regiment at Simpson Army Barracks in Watsonia. I served there for 2 years before discharging, and I suppose I'd had enough as being a signalman at that stage. So when I re-enlisted in 1996, ironically back to the same barracks at Watsonia, Simpson Army Barracks, I joined the Light Horse with the 4th 19th Prince of Wales Light Horse. So I became an armoured crew member. I drove around in armoured vehicles, namely the M113 APC. I did that for 8 years until 2004, and then I transferred still as an Army Reservist into the Australian Army Catering Corps. And from there I served in the Army Reserve until 2010 and crossed over to the regular Army stream, still with catering, and got posted around different units within Australia. And I was discharged in 2014 for PTSD. Poster catalyst for my PTSD started in 1991 when I was on an exercise in the desert at Woomera in South Australia. I was actually shot at by another person on our exercise. For legal reasons, I cannot identify this person, but I can say that I was shot at. It was, to put it this way, it was a training exercise, and I had no ammunition to shoot back. So I had my rifle with me, but because we weren't expecting it to happen, it was quite scary, to put it that way, knowing that there was bullets whizzing past my head, but I couldn't do anything about it. But as a consequence, as years roll by, you forget about it, you put it down to experience, because things do happen on exercise. A lot of stuff happens that the public do not hear about. You don't even have to go overseas to Afghanistan, Iraq or Timor to be hurt or killed. In fact, most of my injuries happened here in Australia. But yeah, so that would have to be the catalyst in 1991 when I was shot at on Australian soil. Even though I had quite a few service injuries over the period of when I first enlisted, the traumatic events that I experienced accumulated, and to the point where things weren't working out at work. In my workplace, I was becoming aggressive, and little things would set me off the hook. And because I was a cook in the army, working in the kitchen, it's a very dangerous environment if you've got aggression issues. We had other veterans that had come back from Afghanistan, and they were in the kitchen with us, but they were still in war mode, and they were even more aggressive than I was. And because I had a lot of trouble coping myself, I was being bastardised and bullied, and it got to the point where I'd organised a fight in the kitchen, and people were going to get seriously hurt. So they removed me from the kitchen environment and put me into the base hospital under suicide watch, because I was to the point where I couldn't cope and I was close to taking my own life. So I spent 12 weeks in the hospital under suicide watch before they eventually sent me back to Melbourne to be with my family before they had a view to discharge me. At that point, I knew my career was over, because with the severity of my mental health issues, your career does not recover. So some 5 years later, I'm where I am now, and I'm ready to start work again, thanks to all the efforts of people around me and my wife supporting me. After operations was pretty hard, because sometimes we would get what we call a POPS, a post-operational psych screen. Well, after 2 of my deployments, I didn't get that. And you learn to cope with issues on your own, but eventually that can lead to what happened to me, because those issues are not dealt with the proper way and identified early. So it's not supposed to happen where you don't get what they call the POPs, your psych screen after a deployment when they ask you how you're coping, etc. But it did, in my case, twice. And I've only met one other veteran that's had that happen to them where they didn't get their psych screen after a deployment. And then eventually, to add insult to injury, one day I got a phone call a year and a half later from the medical section, and they said, "Oh, we noticed you haven't had your psych screen. Would you like to come in for an interview?" And I said, "Okay, yeah, sure." And they said, "How are you coping?" I said, "Fine." So they're scribbling down notes on how I was coping, and that was it. I didn't feel anything different because I suppose after that year and a half later, I had coping mechanisms myself, and I thought I was fine. But unfortunately, as we know now, I wasn't. Because these things sort of simmer in the distance, and you think you're fine, but you're not. Until someday, like I said, something sets it off, like happened in the kitchen, and that's when it all just comes crashing down on top of you. And I've been on some pretty scary scenarios with my defence career, but when things came crashing down, I couldn't cope, and my PTSD started. I've never been so scared. I suppose realising that I still had a place on this earth because I'd lost my career at that stage of 22 years, and the fact that I thought I was a stable family man supporting my family, I thought that was it. There's nothing left for me. I've got no more purpose on this world until the right people came into my life and showed me that there is love, help and support out there. And if you really want to try it, it doesn't hurt to try the lifeline that's been handed to you. It doesn't mean you have to take that lifeline, because I must admit, after I became suicidal the first time, I became suicidal twice more since then, when I thought that it's not going to work, I'm not going to get better. And when you see the devastation, that it does to your family, it reinforces in your mind that you're the cause of it. You see the hurt in your family's eyes. But somehow I managed to turn that around and realise that that hurt, I wanted to make it go away again. So I became stronger. So it's a very slow process. But if you can turn that in a positive way, then it can make you actually stronger. And some 5 years later, I think I'm strong. There was, yes. I did have one meeting with the VVCS, the Veterans Counselling Service in Brisbane, after my first suicide attempt. And I hadn't had any experience with an ESA before that. And they were great. But what put me off was because I was very aggressive at the time and so confused, the person that counselled me, I think they were very, very scared of me. Whether they had bad experiences with other veterans that were aggressive as well, I don't know. But I tended to shy away from that after that, because I thought, if these people are going to help me, they must accept me for who I am and help me get through this. But it's not up to them entirely, it's up to me. But that was my first experience of VVCS in Brisbane, where I was stationed at the time at Gallipoli Barracks.
Well, to put it mildly, I didn't. All I could see was this person that I'd married was a completely different person to the one I had once known. It was like living with a stranger. Having not travelled around with him on his service deployments made it all that much more difficult, because I didn't have any military families of other partners that I could talk to. I was pretty much on my own, not knowing where to go to and where to turn to for help. I eventually got in touch with VVCS, who I've only just recently stopped seeing as from yesterday, trying to nut out why Joe came back the way he was and trying to lead as normal life as possible as a couple and a family. I had to take on the role of full-time carer, which meant that I had to, in a lot of ways, put my life on hold. I was going to several appointments with Joe, quite often 2 to 3 times a week, because he was too scared to travel alone on public transport by himself. He was advised by the medical staff in Brisbane not to sign any legal documents because he wasn't in a fit state of mental mind, which I found very confronting, because not having been a military person myself, serving in the forces, I found it very hard to understand the lingo that the Defence Force used and what it meant. I had a lot of trouble not only understanding where Joe was coming from and what he was thinking, but I found it very hard to explain to our children, especially our youngest one, who was only about 12 at the time. He just kept saying to me, "Mummy, what's wrong with Daddy? And how do you explain to a young child what's wrong with their dad?" It's very, very hard. So, to be quite honest, I didn't cope. But with time and with cancer and with the support of my children and my parents, I've learned how to become stronger and try and battle on throughout the days ahead of us to handle and know when Joe's not feeling quite so crash hot and what I can do to help him now. One of the things that I taught myself to know when he was anxious was I'd be walking alongside him and I'd put my arm let through his arm like so, and I would rest my hand on his forearm, and I could feel it when he was tense because the muscles would tense up. That was one of the only signals I had that I taught myself how to do, to know when Joe was anxious and when he needed help. And I'm just privileged that my husband is still here with me, because I think not only would my world have fallen apart, but my children's would have too. One of the more recent situations I found myself in would have been probably maybe 6 months ago. I attended a psychiatrist appointment with my husband, and this is just not long after his last attempt to commit suicide, but I went to the psychiatrist with him, and Joe had revealed to his psychiatrist that he was driving around familiar places in Heidelberg or elsewhere, looking for somewhere to make a statement, to try and get the message across to the different authorities that which should have been there to guide him as well as us, that he didn't feel like he wanted to live anymore. And the psychiatrist asked Joe whether or not he had a rope in his car, and Joe had the honesty to say yes. And I was living at Ballarat at the time, and I was down here seeing my family members, and the psychiatrist looked at me and directly asked me, "Sharon, can you stay down a bit longer to stop him from wanting to do it?" And I said, "Yes, I can, but I'd have to let my landlord know at the time." And he goes, "Okay, then if you're prepared to stay down for at least a week until he gets himself more stable. I will stop myself from admitting him to another stint in the psych ward on the grounds that you will look after him and that you remove the rope from his vehicle. And I did that, and I had to also get one of our older children to help me work out where we were going to hide the rope so that Joe would never find it. That was probably one of the most confronting situations over the period of his Defence Force days that I've ever confronted. But now that he's more stable mentally for the moment, I'm really proud of the efforts that he has made to get himself back on a more stable track, to be able to integrate back into the workforce, along with the help of his dog Jitty. I've seen a remarkable difference in the short time that he's had her. He's been more willing to go out and put himself out there. He's done a couple of public speeches, one of which was only last weekend out at South Melbourne as a fundraiser to raise funds for the organisation of where Joe got his dog from, as Young Diggers, who do a remarkable job in helping veterans and their families. And we'd like that to continue, to make sure that there are other diggers, whether it be male or female, whether they're Army, Navy or Air Force, to know that there is help out there. This is a matter of just reaching out and asking for it. And I guess that's one of the hardest things to have to do, is to know where to go and how to get the help that you require.
And how do you believe ESOs could better support both Joseph and yourself, Sharon?
To make advice more readily available, be more informative towards the Defence Force members' families. As I said, I had to go up to Brisbane and fly back with Joe. I was handed his medical docs, and it was like, here he is, here's his medical files, is your problem now. Now, I had no idea of what services I could link into, so I think there needs to be more education and more guidance for spouses and families of where to go and get this help and what services are available to them. It needs to be known. So I guess more education on behalf of the organisations that don't give that advice out on a more regular basis. You have to go and ask for it, they don't volunteer it. And I think if they had that little bit of more extra education, they would know the huge need to explain to spouses and children where they can go to get help when they require it. So education is a real key.
Raise their public profile.
And raise public awareness.
Basically, when I've stated that I've had trouble coping, they won't leave me alone. They either stay on the phone, or they'll straight away contact another service and get that person to ring me, such as from this place, Legacy, which I've had phone calls from in the past. And they've clearly stated that they've been referred by VVCS or some other organisation, and with some modicum of understanding of what I'm going through, and if they can offer anything that will be tailored to help us. But there's still a lot more needs to be done yet. You can't rest on your laurels. And there's a lot of organisations that mean well, but I don't think they're quite all working together in some sort of synergy. they need to, with their own talents and specialties, if they can have that mapped out, if there's a broader spectrum, have a map of this ESO is here, this one's here, this one's here, and the veteran in the middle, where it all centres around, and we must not forget the family as well is in the picture. So they all talk to each other the minute a veteran screams out for help. And then straight away, once they contact the veteran, then it's down to the family. Whether it be a younger veteran who's not married or in a relationship, their parents, because I know personally of some veterans that their family have kicked them out of the household. They thought they were too weird or too much of a handful. And I think in some way that's so sad that through education, people will know that it's a tragic thing, but it's not a bad thing. If we can make people more aware, you can turn this into a positive before it does keep on becoming tragic, which is what it is. Because I know full well that I could have easily been another statistic myself. And sadly to say, tomorrow, nothing will change. And that's where, as Sharon said before, I was actually looking to make a statement of myself when I carried that rope around in my car, as I wanted to raise awareness to the plight of other veterans. And as we say in the Defence Force, it's not just a brotherhood, it's a sisterhood. I respect our serving sister soldiers and sailors and airwomen as well. And also first responders, because there is a push through mental health for first responders that do work closely with the military to get the assistance they need as well. And fortunately, through the organisation that gave me my dog Judy here, Young Diggers, they look after first responders with an assistance dog as well. So I'm sure there's others out there, but once again, if we can have that in the basic map of what's available and get it to that person as soon as possible when a cry for help is sent out there, things will change. Maybe not overnight, but hopefully this year, 2017, is where it begins. It's part of the healing process. It's a great motivator. Because as my wife Sharon said, I give public speeches now. And if you see results, it motivates you to want to do more. And you feel worthwhile, you feel good. And there's a bigger picture here. It's not just about me or my family. If I can help others, to me, that's like winning Tatsotto. You feel on a high. You've got the power to do something, to help others. Yeah.
One of the reasons why I think other families should share their stories is so that other people, other members of the Defence Force community and the general public will have a better understanding of mental health, and so that people have a better understanding of what is known as the invisible injury, because mental health is not a injury where people can see. They don't understand how it can affect people, and by not only us but other people sharing their stories will give everybody, regardless of whether they're in the Defence Force or members of the public, will have a better understanding of what people go through on a day-to-day basis living with mental health issues with themselves or somebody that they know, and other people will become much more aware and be able to reach out and help more people by being more educated and having more knowledge of what it can do.